Hi everyone and welcome to the channel. Sorry for another cold opening, but we're back with part 2 of the Colin Furze style no-weld go-kart build. So no messing about, let's crack straight on with the video. Now in part 1 we'd got to the point where we'd sort of had a look at, had to think about what we were going to build, and we got to the point where we'd pretty much got the chassis done. We'd got the two main chassis rails, front and back bumper on there, and we'd got the rear axle mounted. So what we're going to look at first in this video is we're going to look at what we're using to drive this thing. As I alluded to in part 1, on the Colin Furze no-weld go-kart, he used a pit bike engine, and I said we're not going internal combustion, we're going to go for an electric motor. And this is the kit that we've decided to use, so we're going to have a quick look at this, and then what I kind of want to do is just wire it all together, give it a quick test, check it works, check the sort of specs and everything all ties up, and then after that we can start thinking about how we're going to mount all this lot onto the go-kart. So these kits, they're nice and easy to find, you know, eBay, Amazon, Google, whatever. There's lots of these available on the internet. If you just search for something like electric go-kart motor, or, you know, something along those lines, or motor and controller in this case, you can find these kits. They come with different badges on, different names, but to be honest, it looks like they all come out the same factory, and they're all much of a muchness. So what we've got here, we've got our motor. This is a 1800 watt brushless DC motor. We've got a controller, speed controller for that motor. We've got a throttle pedal, so that'll mount the floor of the go-kart there. You can see these kits, we've gone for the foot pedal. Some of them have the kind of twist grip throttle pedal. Some of them have various other bits and bobs. Again, all the same sort of thing. This kit, it also came with this wiring harness. I'm not quite sure how much of this we're going to use yet. It'll depend on how it all sort of lays out on the final go-kart, so we'll just put that to one side for now. And you get a little bag of spares in there as well. So here's his motor. As I say, 1.8 kilowatt brushless. Not a lot to say about it really. I don't know what the quality of these things like inside. It already comes with a sprocket mounted on there. We'll sort of talk about sprockets and gearing later. It feels okay, just sort of turning that shaft, but you know, there are some reports on the internet where most people are fine with these. One or two people, they've turned up and they've been dead in the box. Hence why we're going to give this one a test today. And controller for the motor, quite honestly, it feels a little bit light in my opinion for a 1.8 kilowatt brushless motor controller, but we'll see how this goes. If we look at the end, it looks like we've got a fair old tangle of wires coming out of here, but because these things are designed for kind of e-bikes, maybe not quite e-bikes, but you know, kind of electronic vehicles, maybe go-karts, quad bikes, that kind of thing, you've got a lot of extra functions on here that you wouldn't ordinarily have. The main ones that we need to worry about today, obviously we've got his main thick red and black wires. They're going to go to his batteries. And as motor connections, because this is a brushless motor, we've got 3 wires connecting to that. So if you're unfamiliar with brushless motors, unlike the old DC motors where you just had 2 wires, a positive and a negative, brushless is a little bit different. We've got 3 wires for the 3 phases inside the motor. So those 3 here will connect to the 3 wires here on the motor. And then you get 2 types of brushless motors. You get sensored and sensorless ones. Depends on your application, but sensored is what we're after here. So this 5-pin multi-plug here plugs into this 5-pin multi-plug here on the motor. And in the back of here, you've effectively got a little sensor that senses where the rotor is in relation to the stator, which basically means the controller knows when to send pulses of electricity down your 3 main wires to the motor in order to get it to spin and do what you want. The rest of these wires, we don't need to worry too much about these now. There are some of these we'll have to connect together just to get the controller to power on and to work, but I'll connect it all up and then I'll explain what I've done. Just a quick word on batteries for powering this thing. Now, I've already got quite a few of these. These are lithium polymer or LiPo batteries. Nominally, the motor up there, I've shoved that out of the way, it's a 48 volt motor. Now, normally you'd think, okay, 48 volts, we'd power that off 4 12 volt lead acid batteries, or, you know, something like that. Your big rectangular sort of car batteries, buggy batteries, that kind of thing. Since I've got these, I'm just going to use these for this test, and we'll probably run the go-kart on these to begin with, and we'll I'll use these to figure out what batteries I want to put on long term. You know, we can have a look at these, see how long they last, etc., and then use that to, as I say, figure out what batteries we want. Each of these lithium batteries has got 4 cells in, and I'm going to connect them in series, so we'll have 12 cells in series. Now, lithium batteries are nominally about 3.7 volts. So when you do the sums, 12 cells in series at 3.7 volts each, we're close enough to about that 48 volts that the motor wants, that's going to power this absolutely fine. Okay, so soldered up the battery connections. So as I said, we've got these 3 batteries in series, so the positive into the first battery, out on the negative, into the positive on the second, out on the negative on that, into the positive of the third, and then the negative out and off to the motor. Now, here in the main positive line from the battery, we have got a fuse. I always put a fuse in whenever I've got LiPo batteries. As anybody who's ever worked with these has seen, LiPo batteries, they've got a lot of energy in them, and if they get short-circuited or anything like that, they're quite happy to give that energy up really, really quickly, and you're going to have you're going to have a LiPo fire basically, and it's not a lot of fun. So the fuse here, I've not selected the rating of this fuse in terms of trying to protect the controller or the motor or anything like that. This is to stop the batteries. So if we get a short circuit or something goes wrong, the fuse blows and the batteries will be okay. Okay, we've got everything connected up on the bench. We've got his batteries, as we saw earlier, just over there, and our positive and negative wires, they're connected to the controller. Our 3 motor phasers, they're connected, just taped up for now, just green to green, blue to blue, yellow to yellow. And our Hall sensor plug, that's plugged in as well. Now there's only 2 more connections that you need to make this controller spin this motor. First of which is our throttle pedal. We've got that plugged into the controller via the wiring harness. It just makes it a bit easier actually for this on the bench. It breaks out a few of the connections. There's only one plug that fits in, so you can't get that one wrong. And the second one is on this red and yellow plug. I've very temporarily just bodged a switch in there. Could be a switch, it could be a key that joins a pair of contacts, whatever you want. Effectively all you're doing is shorting that red and yellow wire together. And if we see now, switch in the off position and we get absolutely nothing. But if we turn it on, that energizes the controller. You don't get any beeps out of this, there's no LEDs or anything on here, so you don't know that it's on necessarily, but It's vibrating a bit on the bench, the motor, even though I've got it clamped down, but you can see it's all working. Now, one nice thing to see is that there's a reasonable sort of proportional control of that motor with this throttle pedal. I mean, that's about the slowest you can get it to go. And then it, as you see there, it sort of accelerates nice and linearly with the pedal. Now, there's a couple more things that you could do, and we will be doing later, but I'll just show you them quickly. The first thing is we have a speed limited mode. So on our wiring harness we have to connect this grey cable down here to this grey black, and then if we find the other end of that cable, it's on this grey and green connector here. So again, I'm just going to use this little cable to short these two together. And we can see now we've still got that proportional control on the throttle pedal. But it's only doing about half speed, something like that. So for the kids getting used to something like this, that speed limited mode is one way we can restrict the speed, and until they get used to it, until they get a bit bigger, a bit more used to it. The second thing that we can do is there is a reverse connection as well, which is this black brown wire. So if we connect this brown here, and then again short them out at the end, it's now a green brown, but this will just be a switch on the dashboard, exactly like that switch. And if we watch it now, you might be able to see that we've got the motors running the opposite direction, and we've got really sort of limited speed. Looks about maybe 10%, something like that. So if you get stuck, you can back straight out of it. There's lots more things we can do on that, but we'll worry about them when we've got all this installed on the go-kart. All I wanted to do was check that this was working and everything looks good to go. Okay, so just in front of the rear axle, you can see we've put this sort of bit of a frame, this sort of upstand if you like. Knowing that the motor is going to go sort of somewhere here above the sprocket, I've moved the sprocket and brake disc to opposite sides. They're interchangeable, it's just the default rotation of the motor, having the sprocket on this side will send the go-kart forwards. You can reverse rotation, but just to save messing about and keep every wire colour to colour, I've moved the sprocket. If we'd have had the motor on that side, which is where I had the sprocket originally, forwards would have been backwards, and vice versa. So knowing that the motor's going to be here, we need sort of something, some sort of frame above this sprocket area to sit the motor on, and then we'll have chain down to this sprocket. Now we'll talk about sprockets and gearing later, but knowing that that's where the motor wants to go, in order to kind of build a frame across here to sit the motor on, we've done this upstand here first, and then off this we'll build another frame that kind of goes backwards and down. We'll put a piece of wood in this, just like on the Colin Furze build, and even though we're electric, we can still mount things to that bit of wood nice and easily. Plus, it'll sort of take any sort of side to side wobbly sort of movement about this frame, although I have to say it's pretty solid as it is. Let's get in and have a closer look, and I'll show you how I've done these sort of bolted connections. Okay, I'm afraid we're on wobbly camera again, but started off with this piece of 30mm angle, put that across the chassis, and I've left it sticking out either side, and then coming up we've got a piece of 40x40 angle. Now the reason I've made that thicker than this is when we put this frame that goes backwards, and the motor is pulling on that chain to try and drive the wheels, it's going to put this sort of into compression. The load is going to be downwards. So I've gone for slightly thicker stuff here to sort of make sure we can take that load. It's probably completely overkill. I could have probably done this with the same 30x30 angle, but it doesn't matter. I had this, so that's what I've decided to use. So this 30x30 angle, just one bolt into the chassis on each side, and then we've got a bolt in that direction into the 40x40 angle, and you might just be able to see down there we've got another one from the outside of the 40x40 angle through the chassis. And because we kind of bolted from at least two, and in this case sort of all three directions, all three axes if you like, that makes those joints nice and strong. And then at the top it's another piece of 30x30 angle. We've got one bolt straight through the face of this angle and through the face of the 40x40 angle, and then I've cut a little gap out here and bent the kind of remaining tab downwards that it creates, and then bolted that through to the other face of the 40x40 angle. And that, again, so we've got bolts in two directions, makes these joints quite strong. So next we'll build the frame that the motor's going to sit on. Similar sort of idea, we're going to use a load more of this either 30x30 or 40x40 angle, and we get the motor on at that side, and we can also have a think about how we're going to get the brake caliper onto that side. Okay, brake caliper, taking the exact same approach as the Colin Furze go-kart. So I've got a piece of 40x40 angle here, and I've shaped that out to fit the caliper, leaving the two mounting holes in it. These happen to be M6 on this caliper, so essentially there's his caliper. That's going to fit around there and mount onto the two holes. And then we've got various, well, just got to cut out on each end to fit the kart. But let's, I'll get this bolted on, I'll take it over to the go-kart, and then I'll show you how that's going to fit. Right, we've got his caliper bolted to the bit of angle. Now I've only got plain washers under there at the minute, so I am going to swap those out for some of those little lock washers so that those bolts can't back out. I haven't got any at the minute, but I will swap those. Now when it comes to bolting it on here, I've noticed a little bit of a problem with this kit, but I think we can use it to our advantage. Now when this wheel is on the end of this axle and this nut is tightened all the way up, it tightens to about here where I've got it, and you might just be able to see that the actual castellated part of the nut is tightening past this little hole in the end of the axle where our split pin would go through. So that would still allow this nut to sort of work loose a little bit and the wheel to get all wobbly, which we don't want. Now this isn't a problem on the other side where the sprocket is. On that side, you know, the nut sort of stops somewhere there, which is what you'd expect. So I've had another look at the sort of very limited bits and bobs of instructions that come with this rear axle, and it mentions these spacers, saying the short spacer goes with the sprocket and the long spacer goes with the brake disc. Now the two spacers I've got in this kit are both the same size, so I presume that I've been given two short spacers and this one should have been slightly longer, which would have moved the wheel out, which would have kept this this nut in the correct place. So what we're going to do is we're going to use that to our advantage for when it comes to mounting the brake caliper. So what I've got is, I'm just going to slide that out in a minute so we can get this in. So that's where our caliper is going to go. I've deliberately cut this so we've got a little bit of sort of left to right movement, but also I can get this up and down anywhere on here so that we can get the pads in the exact right place on the end of the disc. And then this spacer here and the tiny one behind it, I can remake that spacer or just pack it out with washers, whatever's available, and likewise either lengthen this spacer with a few washers or a second spacer, whatever, and we can then use that to get this wheel in the right position. But it also means our brake disc will fit bang in the middle of the caliper, because we're remaking these spacers. We're not trying to position the caliper kind of back and forth in this direction to the disc. We'll put the caliper with this bit of angle straight onto these uprights, and then we'll remake these spacers to fit. Right then, let's talk about sprockets and gear ratios and how fast we want this go-kart to go and all that kind of stuff. Now, here's our motor. It's got a 9-tooth sprocket on there that it came with, and it also came with an 11-tooth sprocket as well. There's a sort of spare we can swap in if we want to. The no-load speed of the motor is 5,600 RPM, and I checked that when we tested it on the bench earlier in the video. Now, the load speed of the motor, according to the spec sheet, is 4,500 RPM, so that's more the sort of speed we'd expect this to go when the motor is shoving around, you know, the weight of the go-kart, the driver, etc. The no-load speed, we're not going to worry about that too much. We'll assume a kind of 4,500 RPM speed, and theoretically it might get a little bit faster, but not very much. Down there on the axle is a 58-tooth sprocket, and that's what came with the axle kit. Now, if we were to use that 9-tooth sprocket on the motor and that 58-tooth sprocket on the axle, with that 4,500 RPM motor speed and these size wheels, we'd get a load speed, a sort of maximum speed, if you like, of about 25 mile an hour. And purely sort of gut feeling for me, I think that's a little bit too fast. We've got to kind of be a bit careful here, because if we try and get this thing to go too fast, it'll take forever to accelerate to its top speed, or even worse, the motor would just get too hot and sort of burn out trying. Likewise, if we don't get a high enough top speed, we'd get really quick acceleration, but it'd be really boring because it'd barely be doing walking pace or something like that. So we've got to try and sort of aim for something in the middle. Also, when I'm talking top speed here, I mean unrestricted. And I did say back in part 1, I think, that I have ideas for how we can slow this down a lot more, and then as my kids get older we can slowly kind of release a bit more sort of speed, if you like, out of this, so that in a number of years time these are perhaps the top speeds that you'd ever get out of this thing. You know, I'm not suggesting that we're just going to sit them on, let them whiz around at 20 mile an hour and call it good, or whatever speed we choose. But anyway, 25 mile an hour with that combination of sprockets, I think that's a little bit too fast. I think we need to come down just a bit. So a couple of ways of doing that. First way would to be put a sort of intermediate ratio in. So we'd put the motor down here somewhere, and then sprocket on the motor would drive a sprocket on a lay shaft, and then the other end of the lay shaft would have another sprocket driving this. So we'd have 2 reduction stages, if you like. Slight problem with that. These sprockets and chains that come with these kits tend to be something called TF8, and rather annoyingly you can't get every size sprocket in this in this series. There only seems to be a few sizes available, and I couldn't find a sensible set of sprockets for a secondary sort of ratio, secondary gear reduction ratio, to get the sort of speed that I wanted out of this. So if we're just going to do it with a single ratio, we've either got to go smaller on the motor, which looking at that is just not possible, or we put a larger sprocket on the axle. And that's what I've managed to find. This is a 74-tooth sprocket, I think, and it should just, if we unbolt that one off its carrier, it should just drop in straight down there. And with the 74-tooth sprocket, we should get a maximum speed of about 20 mile an hour rather than 25. And again, as I say, it's just gut feel, but that seems a little bit more sensible to me, so that's what we're going to go for. So first things first, I'm going to swap the sprocket onto there, as I say, and then I'm going to get a secondary piece of angle that's going to bolt somewhere on here like that, and then our motor, that's going to sit straight above it. We'll get it all lined up and everything, get the sprockets in line so that the chain stays on, and then we get all that lot connected up and give it a try. Okay, so as you can see, we just put a couple of bits of plywood just on the upright there and on this sort of frame at the back. They'll make it nice and easy just to screw things down to or attach things to. Just saves us drilling holes in metal all the time. Not the nicest bits of wood, but once they're painted up, they'll look absolutely fine. So next we're going to get the chain on, and we'll use one of these little sort of split link things that just helps us join the two ends of the chain together if you haven't got a proper sort of chain splitter. And then we'll just put washers underneath the foot of the motor to lift it up so that we can get the chain tension exactly right, exactly where we want it. And then we'll just bob the controller on and give it a quick test. Okay, chain is on. Not sure if I've got that chain tension quite right. I think it might be a bit tight, but I need to look into that a bit more. It's something I'm not really too sure about, but we'll sort that in time for the next video. Main thing is it's on. Just very sort of quickly, I've got the controller connected, just got those connections taped up, so that'll be alright. It'll just do for a quick test. We've got some batteries down here. We've got the throttle connected, so fingers crossed. Let's see if this works. Yes, it's working. Okay, scratch that. I spoke too soon. What actually happened was it worked for sort of 4 or 5 seconds, and then the chain wanted to ride off the big sprocket. That kind of wanted to pull the motor forward as the little sprocket's turning. It's pulling it towards the big sprocket because the chain's trying to come off, and that was that. I've had a look at it. 2 problems, I think. First problem, the big sprocket wasn't perfectly in line with the motor sprocket. Fix that by adjusting the spacers, same way we did for the brake caliper, to get that to fit dead in the centre. Second, when that chain wanted to wander a little bit, it was making this 30x30 angle flex. What I've done for now is just put this thick plate on underneath the motor. I've still got the washers under there for setting the height to get the tension in the chain. But what I'm trying to do is effectively stiffen that back angle up a bit. That's only really something I've just put there to test. I think what I'm going to have to do is either take that plate the whole way across, or maybe put a bit of sort of 5mm thick flat bar underneath this rear angle. Just needs a little bit more strength in it. But the good thing is, it's working now. Okay, so we're as we were before, got the throttle fitted, got the batteries down here, we're powered on. And I've been messing about with that for about the last 10 minutes now, just with a big silly grin on my face. So yeah, that's all working now. You might see a little bit of wobble in that wheel from side to side. If you remember back in part 1, I said there was a slight bend in that axle. That's what's causing it. I've checked everything else. Everything's square where it should be. We're just going to have to try it, see how we go with that. So I need to sort that motor mounting out, but I'm not going to go into that in this video. This one's gone on long enough as it is. Come back for the next one when we're going to be doing the front axle, steering, all that kind of stuff. We'll see how we get on with that. You might be able to see I've made a bit of a start on it up there. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, give us a comment, thumbs up, all that kind of good stuff down below. But for now, I'm just going to say thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.